Spokane Valley could become a sanctuary city of a different
Councilman
kind.
Caleb Collier says that this
I'm proposing that the city of Spokane Valley issue a proclamation stating that our city is a Second Amendment sanctuary city.
Welcome to the fire.
Today on Church and State with Justice for Some with author Lise Pearlman. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we drive morality and religion over tolerance and apathy. And I'm your host, Caleb Collier, once again, your favorite far-right shock jock, and the show that talks about politics and religion. Jesus Christ is our referee, so it's always nice and clean. Real quick, point you to the website, churchandstate.media. Number one, fill out this registration form. You'll get our newsletter, you'll bypass the censorship, and, of course, personal phone call from yours truly. While you're on the site, check out our most recent episodes, continuing to bring incredible guests and really incredible conversations. And check those out and share them with friends, family, and neighbors. Of course, also check out the featured guest page. We've had some incredible people over the years. And with all of them, you can click on the name. It'll bring you right to the episode. And of course, I want you to do some shopping here. I want you to check out our affiliate page. And these are companies that I believe in, that I personally support, and I shop with myself. So use that promo code Church and State. And of course, you're going to get a discount for some, but all of them, you'll be helping to support us. And speaking about that support, you got to hit the donate button for us, ladies and gentlemen. We're on 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, bringing you incredible shows. It takes a lot to produce these. And with being part of NRBTV and Prepper Broadcasting Network and newscasters and Your News and Faith and Freedom Television and now national syndication through AM/FM radio, that's a lot. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of money. And so if you can hit or throw anything at us, it will, honestly, we really appreciate it, and we will put it to good use. Lastly, if you want to get a hold of us, Church and State 1776 at proton.me. With that, let's go ahead and start this episode. Now, I'm thrilled to bring to you Lise Pearlman. She's an acclaimed nonfiction author, filmmaker, former trial lawyer, and judge, and nationally recognized speaker on famous trials of the 20th century. She's written a slew of different books that I look forward to reading myself. And we're going to be talking about some fascinating American history. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us on Church and State.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, a real pleasure. You have, through your career, you've really covered a lot of very interesting topics, perhaps history that's unknown to a number of individuals. Can you just tease the audience with a little bit of the subjects that you've covered and reported on?
Well, one of them is how Hawaii became a state, which was galvanized by two trials in the 1930s that were the reason for the trial was alleged rape by 5 Pacific Islanders of the wife of a Navy lieutenant, but it turned out to have been false charges, and a lot of the information was kept hidden for about 20 years. So it became the Revolution of 1954 when it went public, and it changed the political situation and in the territory and galvanized the statehood.
Absolutely. And this is something that far too few Americans know the truth about this. And we had this, sort of Monroe Doctrine that we were living by. And honestly, we're currently seeing it now. I mean, the audience knows this. When we went into Venezuela and kidnapped the elected president, I came out in opposition to that. We should not be doing things like that as Americans. We should be mindful of our own country and not trying to press our weight or the fact that we're the biggest bully into taking and kidnapping somebody like that. So yes, this continues to be an issue for America.
And there are other stories that people know something about, like the Scottsboro Boys, which was a trial in the 30s that ultimately led to a Supreme Court decision that said, if you're faced with capital punishment, you're entitled to a lawyer. Even if you have no money, the state will have to pay for it. But what people don't know about it was that there was a white sheriff who risked his life for the Scottsboro Boys just before trial. And within a year of the trial, he was murdered. And that has recently been attributed to the KKK. It was rumored, but it may well have been revenge. So that's a different part of that story for someone who spoke up for their due process, that they're entitled to a trial. So there are different parts of these different stories, and one of them, of course, is the Lindberg case, which I wrote a whole book about, separate from With Justice for Some. And there was just an awful lot of information that didn't go public at the time of the 1932 trial. Back then, it wasn't required by the Supreme Court that the prosecutor reveal exculpatory evidence. And this was the biggest investigation in U.S. history, so they had over 90,000 pages of investigatory material that was kept hidden, which included contrary statements by some of the people who testified for the state at trial, and other evidence that are now in archives and now public because of a governor in New Jersey in 1981 who responded to the widow's, Hauptmann's widow. He was executed for this crime, but his widow kept pursuing justice. And she got the governor to force the state police to reveal all the documents from the investigative files. So that was one of the main sources for my book, but there were a lot of other archives also that have some amazing revelations.
You know, this is a case that has fascinated the American public for a long time. This is a man who was a celebrity, obviously crisscrossing the world in an airplane, very brave man, and his child is kidnapped. And a lot of people know that, kidnapped and murdered. A lot of people know that part of the story, but you really dove deep into this. I'd love to explore this topic a little bit more with you. Can you walk the audience through it?
Well, the child was the firstborn son of Charles Lindberg and his wife Anne, who were considered at the time American royalty. They were in the news all the time. Newsreels at the movies covered him since May of 1927 when he flew nonstop from New York to Paris, showing how linked we were to the rest of the world. It prompted the powers that be in Washington to use him as essentially the poster boy for getting airports built, for spending a lot of money on creating an Army Air Force. It wasn't a separate Air Force at the time, but augmenting that because they could envision a time when bombs might be dropped from planes. So it really changed the culture in Washington about, there wasn't even a Pentagon at that time. And so that also meant that he was featured in 80 parades across the country. A quarter of America saw him on parade. So he was this huge star. And then when his firstborn son was reported kidnapped on March 1, 1932, it was worldwide news. And it was at a time during the Depression when there were kidnappings of middle-class and wealthy people's children almost every day. So it was something that could happen that nobody could believe did happen to him. But from the beginning, the police did not do a very good job of investigating. They allowed Lindberg himself to be in charge of the investigation, even though he was one of 5 people on the premises when the child disappeared. And evidence started disappearing. So that was one aspect of it. And then they spent a ton of money. They had police looking all over the country and some places across overseas for this child. And then 10 weeks after he disappeared, they found the body within 5 miles of home. And it was still a mystery what happened. And then 2.5 years later, after arresting and letting go on a number of other people, they arrested Bruno Richard Hauptmann, who was an immigrant from Germany who had come as a stowaway 10 years earlier. He was a carpenter and he lived in the Bronx. And he had spent a $10 bill for gasoline for his car in a Bronx neighborhood that had was a gold certificate, and all of the money that had been used for a ransom that turned out not to produce the child. Lindberg had paid this ransom through a go-between in April of 32, more than a month before the child's body was found. And so all of the serial numbers were recorded. So the bank realized it was on the list from the Lindberg baby kidnapping. The police were able to trace the $10 bill that was spent because the attendant had written down the license plate number, and they found him at his home and found hidden in his garage about $14,000 also from the ransom. He had an explanation they didn't believe, that this was money left with him by a friend for safekeeping that he didn't even know was money. He said it was left to him in a shoebox, and he kept it on a shelf in his kitchen. And then his friend died, and months later, he remembered the shoebox. He opened it up, and it had this money in it. Well, in any event, that was called, his friend was Isidore Fish. It was called his Fish story.
Can I pause you here real quick? Because there's just so many interesting facts that you're dropping on the audience. Number one, I wanted to ask, was he acting in a suspicious behavior? Why did the gas station attendant feel that he needed to write down his license plate number?
Good question. It was September of 1934, and the reason that's important is because a year and a half earlier, on May 1 of 1933, FDR had outlawed gold certificates in large quantity. You were not allowed to keep a large number of them. If you had one or two, that wasn't such a big deal. And so the word had gotten out to merchants, local merchants, from the police that they should be recording at gold certificates because their use was now a misdemeanor if you had a large quantity of them. And they were also still looking for most of the money. Some of the money had returned from the ransom, had gotten back in circulation, and they hadn't figured out who did that. But that was how he was traced, and the reason it was recorded was because it was now illegal.
Well, there we go. That answers a lot. Go figure that it was about making gold illegal in this country.
Well, it wasn't gold. It was gold certificates.
Gold certificates, yes, thank you.
A $10 bill that looks just like any other $10 bill, but it's got gold on it, and it means it was backed, by gold held by the government.
Yes,
and
yes.
They went off the gold standard, which is why they made it illegal.
Absolutely. Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but keep going with the story. It's already very fascinating. He has this shoebox. His friend had given it to him. His friend dies, and he finally ended up looking at it. And I'm assuming, like most people, you got a shoebox full of cash during the Depression. You might start looking at that to use.
Well, he did, and he hid it in his garage because he knew it was illegal to have such a stash. He didn't even tell his wife, and he used a little bit of it. He spent $20 for his shoes for his wife and $10 at the station, but there's no evidence that he actually spent any of it until the August of 34. At the trial, they tried to suggest that. They had a witness who said, I think I can identify him as a man who spent $5 with that was part of the ransom a year and a half earlier at a crowded theater. And it was contrary to the statement she'd given to the police at the time that Hauptmann spoke with a very heavy German accent. The man she said she interacted with spoke English as an American. And it was that much earlier. But what was happening before Hauptmann's trial, he was immediately sent from New York, where he was accused of being the person who had accepted the ransom money. Okay, so that was a crime that they were pursuing, but that got cut short because he got transferred to New Jersey to face murder charges for the death of the child on March 1. So he faced a death penalty for the murder of the child when they actually had only arrested him for the ransom aspect of it. So they had to find other evidence to implicate him in the child's actual murder. And what I researched is that much of that was manufactured.
Sure, and I want to get into that. Do you believe that part of this was, a German that speaks, with a German accent? It's, post World War I. We're kind of gearing up towards maybe involvement in World War II here. With the rise of Hitler. Is this like the perfect boogeyman? Is this why they singled out this guy?
That was part of it for sure, and he was actually a soldier in World War I, and his brothers died in World War I fighting for the Germans. So that made him an easy target. And the day that he was arrested, and again, he was arrested for possession of some of the ransom money. There was still a lot of ransom money unaccounted for. It was $50,000 had been paid. He had 14,000, and some had already been returned. In fact, there was someone who, on the last day it was legal to use those gold certificates, turned in about $3,000 to a bank that was part of the Lindberg kidnap money. He was never caught, but he had signed a deposit slip, and when Hauptmann went to trial, the handwriting experts for the state said they're not the same person. That was somebody else. That person was never caught. So there are all kinds of questions about who else, if he was involved, or whether he was actually the right person. I'm sorry. What was your last question?
Well, I mean, you've answered that as far as the German being the perfect boogeyman in this situation. Did you want to add anything more to that?
Well, yes. He lived in the Bronx, which is where they were focused on thinking that that's where the perpetrator lived. And they wound up with an expert, a wood expert, a federal government employee from Wisconsin, who went to the apartment where Hauptmann lived. And the day that Hauptmann was arrested, he was removed from the apartment, as was his wife and his 2-year-old. So they never were in there again. But the police rented it, took it over, and there was a hall closet, linen closet, that you could climb up into the attic. It was a small attic, and in the attic, they saw that there was a pine floor. A week after Hauptmann's arrest, according to one of the officers, the one who was in charge, Lieutenant Bornman, he saw for the first time that nobody else had seen a gap in the floor that indicated part of one of the floorboards had been removed. And he thought this was a huge clue, and so he took that and showed that to their expert. He brought the expert in to look at the attic, and the expert would later testify at trial that the remaining portion of that floorboard matched one of the rails of the kidnap ladder, because the child was supposedly kidnapped out of a second-story window from the Lindberg home in March of '32, and that had been found in the yard. And so they had this ladder. One of the big issues that should have been a reason for the trial for the trial to be a mistrial was that the police had asked a different expert, someone who was able to reveal latent fingerprints back in 1932, a week after the child disappeared, to see if he could find fingerprints on the ladder. And he did, and the police themselves had been unable to do so. Their expert had seen nothing on the ladder. But when he put silver nitrate on it, which was a process then used in Europe but not in the U.S., hundreds of prints popped up on the outside of the ladder, and they determined that the police had mishandled it. They were police fingerprints, they were reporters' fingerprints. You couldn't tell whose they were. However, this expert, who was a doctor, did this as an avocation, and he really thought he would be very helpful if he took the ladder apart, made a model, and checked the inside. And he checked the inside, and he found one print on an inside corner of a rung against the ladder rail that he figured had to have been made by the builder of the ladder. Nobody else had touched that. And he told the police that. So fast forward 2.5 years when he's no longer working on the case, when Hauptmann's arrested, Dr. Hudson, Rasmus Hudson, calls the police and said, "Have you checked his fingerprints against the one I found on the inside of the ladder?" And he was told they don't match. And he said, "You have arrested the wrong man." And what happened after that is that the police erased all fingerprints off of the ladder before trial. And they admitted doing that. They said they did it to put it back in its original condition, which wasn't true, because originally when they found it, it had a print on an inside joint. He was so angry at what the police did that he wound up testifying for the defense. Not on that issue because there was nothing to point to it on that, but on a related issue.
Okay, so continuing on with the case, and it seems to me that a lot of the evidence was manufactured or flat out removed that could have proved this man innocent. Let's continue to walk through this. Let's walk through the trial and talk a little bit more about how they really engineered this boogeyman and then threw the book at him.
Right. Well, they came up with 3 people who said they were eyewitnesses to seeing Hauptmann in the area of Hopewell, which was the town where the Lindbergs had their farmhouse. And within a week before the kidnapping, nobody could testify that they saw him on the estate or on the night that the child disappeared. But these 3 men did. Well, it turned out years later when the evidence was revealed, the police had interrogated all of them before a trial and they had given opposite stories. So none of that cross-examination happened because the defense didn't have access to it. I've created a reenactment of this trial using original testimony from both sides, the key testimony for the defense and key testimony for the state. And then I created an invented character, and the invented character is a modern lawyer with access to all of the discovery that came out later. And so he could cross-examine these witnesses about the discrepancies. They don't answer I made it into a 2.5-hour play. They don't answer because they never did, but the audience gets to hear that. And then the audience at the end gets to vote on whether the case ought to be reopened. And I've done it 4 times now, and every audience overwhelmingly votes to reopen the case.
Well, I so appreciate that, using, an avenue of theater to prove that there is at least some doubt that the case should be reexamined, because as this widow of this man, she wanted to pursue justice. She wanted to clear her husband's name because she didn't believe that he'd had anything to do with this. And while the state,
I'm
what's
sorry.
that?
With him that night, he picked her up from work, so she was had firsthand knowledge that he wasn't there. He was in the Bronx picking her up as a waitress at 8 p.m. from where she worked.
Okay, well, there we go right there. There's more evidence to throw into this. But, yeah, while the state unfortunately killed this man, murdered this man, we still could right a wrong here in at least clearing his name.
Well, there's an effort right now, ongoing effort, a case on appeal to re-examine some of the evidence because DNA testing could actually shed light on this. There are 2 different kinds of DNA testing that are available. One is wood DNA testing. The police made the Hauptmann trial the star exhibit of their New Jersey State Police Museum. It has the wood evidence still on display. Which is a piece of floorboard that was brought into court that supposedly matched one rail of the ladder and the ladder itself. So that could be done. In the last 15 years or so, that's been the way in which experts tell whether something is from the same piece of wood is from the same source or not. But the New Jersey police have not done that, and they've resisted doing that. But what the case on appeal is focused on is the ransom demand letters, which are in envelopes that they kept and have stamps. And of course, back then, envelopes were licked and stamps were licked. So human DNA could be theoretically removed from that. That is probably still possible. But they're also fighting that.
And I would assume with you said he was a young son, so I'm assuming that there's still some people that generationally they're related to the supposed killer that they could test off of.
Right. His great grandniece has volunteered, and there's a DNA sample, and his grandniece as well. His son, I understand, died a couple of years ago. He was in his early 90s, I believe, by then, and he only had 1 child. So and he had no children. So this is his sister's family.
Okay. But I mean, still, there should be enough to link to be able to say, yes, this.
Definitely. And they have a letter that Hauptmann wrote that in possession of the New Jersey State Police, which he licked the envelope of.
Okay.
They may have other evidence from which they could do it, but they're resisting that for now.
Well, I mean, they probably don't want to admit that they got the whole thing wrong. There's a lot of cover-up culture going on these days. Is there anything else within this case that would give an individual looking into it pause to say, hey, what about this evidence, or what are the lack of evidence here?
Absolutely. One of the things, what my book focused on was Lindberg. Lindberg himself should have been a suspect. In fact, that's when you have a child who is abnormal, and this child was diagnosed as abnormal. He had an oversized head. He may have been hydrocephalic. That's not clear, but he had a rickety condition. This is all diagnosed by his own pediatrician. And other overlapping toes. There were other issues about this child. And when you have a child who's abnormal, the Scotland Yard has always looked to the parents as a possible suspect. And they told that to the New Jersey State Police representative who came there, and they didn't do that. Instead, they put Lindberg in charge of the investigation right near the beginning. And what happened? Well, one of the things that they noticed right away, the police noticed, was that the nursery where the child had supposedly been kidnapped from had no fingerprints in it whatsoever that they could find that night. And what did that mean? That was weird. Why? Because Lindberg's wife, the nanny, and the cook had come in at 10 o'clock when the nanny was checking on him to get him up again, let him go to on his potty, and put him back. He was 20 months old. He wasn't really a baby. He was more like a toddler. But in any event, when she found he wasn't there, then that raised the alarm in the house. The first thing that Anne, Lindberg's wife, and the nanny thought was that Lindberg had done it as a practical joke. Why? Because he'd done it before. He'd hidden his son in a closet once before as a joke, making people think the child had been kidnapped. And he insisted he hadn't done anything. But then he shooed everybody out of the room, and he told them, let's keep the door closed, we're calling the police, we want to preserve the evidence. Well, when the police arrived, they brought in their fingerprint man, and at midnight he's checking the room. There are no prints whatsoever. Well, the women had gone in there and searched high and low and touched the windowsill, touched the crib, touched a lot of surfaces. Their prints weren't even there. So he assumed that somebody in the house had removed all prints after the child disappeared. And there's only one person in that 5-person household who was upstairs alone after the child disappeared and before the police arrived, and that was Lindberg. Mm-hmm. They never pursued that. There were other issues about his behavior. One of them is a very key one, which I mentioned at the beginning of my book. There was a teenage neighbor who was coming home from high school, driving his family car on the night of March 1 at about 6 o'clock. And it was just dusk. And as he passed the Lindbergh's driveway, they had a long driveway up to their house, he was passed by another vehicle that had a lone driver wearing a fedora that obscured...
Lisa, I got to pause you real quick. We hit that hard break, and actually this is a perfect teaser for the audience. Right. We're leaving you right on that cliff there. This is Caleb Collier with Church and State. Are you tired of your device spying on you? Ladies and gentlemen, we live in 1984. Your phones, your tablets, your smart televisions, they all are spying on you. And this is why I heavily endorse Mark37.com. This is everything you need for your digital privacy. Phones, tablets, laptops, all of them are ghost protocoled. So that means that you are in charge of your own data. Just go to churchandstate.media, scroll over to shop, and hit mark37.com for all of your privacy needs. Make sure to use that promo code Church and State. And we are back. Thank you for staying with us. And boy, what a teaser. That was fantastic. I couldn't have planned that better. But hey, we're going to go right back to our guest, ladies and gentlemen. Real quick, let me plug one of our awesome affiliates, and I'm thinking coffee. Look, I love coffee. You love coffee. Chris really loves coffee. If you like coffee as much as we do, you got to check out Hunter's Blend Coffee. This is delicious stuff. Chris and I are using it now. It is fantastic. It's smooth, got a great taste, that coffee taste that you so appreciate. So check them out, huntersblendcoffee.com. Use that promo code Church and State. Order a bag. I guarantee you're not going to be disappointed. And of course, you're going to be helping to support us. And one more time, real quick, Hit the donate button for us, ladies and gentlemen. Keep us alive. Keep conversations like this one happening. This is such an interesting story. I really hope you're enjoying it. And if you want to see more, hit the donate button. All right, with that, let's go back to our guest, Lise Pearlman. We're talking about just a case that does not seem to die. People continue to have interest in this years and years after it has occurred. Lisa, you were talking about a neighbor that had seen another car with a low fedora over their eyes. Please continue.
Well, the neighbor, Sebastian Lupica, was very observant. He loved cars. And this other car, he said, was a 1929 Dodge. And it, the driver, you couldn't see his face. He said he was slim. And he had next to him on the passenger seat a ladder, a folded ladder. And the next day, the police took Lupica after Lupica learned of the kidnapping, which didn't happen until hours later than this. This is at 6 p.m. The kidnapping happened sometime between 8 and 10. And so that the next morning, Lupica heard about it. He went to the police to tell them what he had seen, and they thought this was a huge clue. They showed him the ladder they'd found in the yard. He said, yes, that looks exactly like pretty much what I saw, you know. And so they took him the next day. The police took him looking for 1929 Dodges that were local, because he said it had local plates, just like his car did. That was either black or dark blue. He couldn't quite tell in the dusk. And he remembered that it had wooden spokes on the wheels, and he remembered that it had a spare tire on the rear, and he remembered what the grill looked like. So he had very specific knowledge, and he started looking, and they took him halfway through a list of local owners of such a car. There weren't a huge number of people who owned cars in that rural area at that time, and halfway through they quit. Well, that coincided pretty much with when Lindberg got in charge. And so they never resumed it, looking for this key suspect. And he actually later on was interviewed by the FBI, Sebastian Lupica, and told them a lot of these same details. And he wound up testifying for the defense at Hauptmann's trial that it wasn't Hauptmann that he saw. And he said to some extent he thought he might resemble him. Of course, the first time Lupica saw Hauptmann was after he'd lost a lot of weight after he'd been arrested. Hauptmann was a stocky guy when he was arrested. He was very thin when he was at trial. But then he was sure it wasn't him. That wasn't who he saw. What happened many years later is that there were a lawyer and a police chief who wanted to investigate the case in the late 1980s and early 90s, and they wound up interviewing Lupica in his old age. And what they agreed upon together was that the man he saw was actually Lindberg. And part of the reason they thought that is because when Lupica was interviewed by the police on the next day, the police brought Lindberg over and said, "Hey, he's got this information about some stranger with a ladder just a couple hours before the kidnapping." And Lindberg said, "I have to go see my wife," or something to that effect, and disappeared. So his attitude, his reaction was weird, and then thereafter there was no follow-up on the rest of the list.
Now, did Lindberg have a 1929 Dodge?
No, he did not, and I think it was a borrowed car.
Okay.
It wasn't his car for sure, but they never found out whose car it was. I think it was a car taken probably from an employee at Rockefeller Institute lab where Lindberg worked part-time as a volunteer, or actually almost full-time as a volunteer. But that was never pursued, so you can't know exactly whose it was, but it wasn't Hauptmann's car. Hauptmann's car was a different year. It was a Dodge, a different year, but it also was a cheaper model, and it had wire rims and wire spokes in the tires, and it had something very special. And what it had was that Hauptmann was an accomplished carpenter, and he wanted to go visit his sister in California in 1931. So what he had done is he built a handmade box to use as an additional trunk, and he appended it permanently to the back of his car, and his spare tire was on the driver's side. It wasn't in the back. And that had 3 drawers in it, and you could open it up to make a platform for dining on, and they put camping gear in there, and he and his friend and his wife drove across country in 31 with that. The police removed that box, that trunk, before trial, and only showed the jury and witnesses pictures of the car where you couldn't see the back and you couldn't see the driver's side where there was a spare tire. One of the men who they brought forward saying, I recognize him as somebody I saw, had earlier said, no, the man he saw was actually much smaller, about 5'7" instead of 5'9" or 10, but also resembled more like Isidore Fish than Hauptmann. But he also said there was a spare tire on the back of the car that he saw, and he wasn't sure if it might have been a Buick. So there are things that didn't come out in the trial which undermined what they said. And Sebastian Lepica was a very credible teenager with details that they didn't follow up on.
Sure. Okay. Let me ask you this. Obviously, people are going to be wondering, who do you think did it? All right, is going to be the big question here. But before I get to that, who was the individual who had the shoebox full of money who later on died?
Oh, that was Isidore Fish.
Okay. And so what's the connection there?
Well, Isidore Fish was known to the police as a fraudster. He was passing bad money on other occasions. He was defrauding people with different schemes. He was a friend of Hauptmann's, and the two of them during the Depression were in business together selling seal furs. I'm not sure that it was on the black market. And so that was their connection. And they were German-speaking and in a German neighborhood, and they were friends. Isidore Fish was one of his friends. But Isidore Fish is also implicated in other ways. There were 3 or 4 people who were interviewed who recognized his picture as having been around Hopewell. In fact, one of the people who identified him was very strange. This was Henry Breckenridge. Henry Breckenridge was Lindberg's lawyer. He said, I recognize that picture. I think that's the same guy who came to visit me in my office in Manhattan on March 8th, a week after the child disappeared, and seemed to be connected to the kidnapped gang. And at the time, that was what the police assumed, is that it was a gang. And I met with him for more than an hour, I think several hours. And I got the impression he was very sinister, and I got the impression the child might already be dead. He doesn't tell any of this to the police until September of 1934. So he waits. This could have been a huge clue, whatever. They were researching this and investigating it thoroughly, and he says nothing until after Hauptmann's arrest. And then he goes to the police and gives this statement, which the police never made public until much later. So that document is something that the New Jersey State Police also have in their archives. But it was, I think that was the Bronx Police who took that statement. In any event, so he's implicating Fish. At the trial, the state took the position that everything that Hauptmann was saying about Fish was untrue, that he was an innocent bystander or whatever. And they had information they were also covering up.
So as we've progressed through the show, we now have 2 candidates as potentially suspects. The father, which, by the way, can I just add, hiding your baby to make your wife think that the child has been kidnapped as a joke, that's pretty strange. That's pretty strange behavior.
Well, he did that, a lot of strange practical jokes over the years, and I mentioned those in the book too, because he had a very weird sense of humor, if you call it that. He almost killed one of his friends when they were pilots years earlier. They were before he became famous, and he was mad at his roommate for always making him fill the pitcher of water that they kept in their boarding house room that they drank from. So he filled it with kerosene instead of water, and the guy took 2 big gulps and was hospitalized for a week. He forgave him But my God.
Yeah, that's a pretty sick joke to be playing on somebody like that. Could certainly have killed him there. All right, so we have two people that the police most certainly should have looked at. Is there anyone else in this mix that the police were looking at or perhaps should have looked at?
Definitely, there are others. Isidore Fish was not the kidnapper that night. He wasn't placed there that evening, and that I think he was involved. As I think he was hired to be involved, but I think that the kidnapping was actually not real. It was a hoax. I think it was orchestrated by Lindberg and his lawyer. And what happened to the child is really shocking. It wasn't either one of them who killed him. I think he was brought secretly to be experimented upon. And we have a modern, I have a modern pathologist who's worked with me on my book, and I have his declaration attached to my book. And he was a witness at my 2.5-hour program, and he's otherwise gone public with what he's found. The child, when found, was missing most of its internal organs. It was also missing one arm from the elbow down, and the other hand, and the left leg below the knee. That was attributed to wild animal attack, or that the body deteriorated in the 2 months plus since the child was killed. He said no, from what he's looked at, which is the medical reports at the morgue when the child was brought in, which were incomplete. There was no complete autopsy. There was a so-called look-see on the night of May 12, 1932, and then they intended to do more. And before that could happen, Lindberg had the body cremated, so they weren't able to complete it. But what they did do with what they recorded included the fact that the kidneys were missing. And Dr. Peter Speth, who is a pathologist, a New Jersey pathologist that I consulted, who's been in 2,000 death investigations, said the kidneys should have still been there. And they were protected by ribs. And when the body was found, it was also, even though it was mostly skeletonized, it was wearing 2 T-shirts. And they were the T-shirts that the nanny said, yeah, that's the ones I put on him the night that he disappeared, so she could recognize them. But the T-shirts were essentially intact. They were frayed a little bit, but they were intact. Well, they're over the rib cage. The kidneys are missing inside of the rib cage. Dr. Speth said the only way that happened is by operation, as far as he could tell. That's the only logical conclusion that he could reach.
So the child was experimented on, and this is a period of time where eugenics had gained in popularity. Obviously, this celebrated celebrity, as you pointed out, was in magazines, was in parades. It appears anyway, did not love the fact that he had a disabled child, and so perhaps he was kidnapped to be experimented on. For what purposes? I mean, I'll leave that to you. You're the expert.
Well, the reason that Lindberg was a eugenicist, and he was lauded by them. He won an award by them because of his superior genes. His Nordic genes is what enabled him to do his fantastic flight. And the doctor he was volunteering for at Rockefeller Institute was one of the leading lights in the eugenics movement internationally. He co-founded the first international eugenics conference in London, and then was prominent in the one they did in the 1920s in the U.S. So that was his focus as well. Lindberg went to him originally because he was concerned about his sister-in-law who had a defective heart valve, and he was told that this doctor was doing experiments which might lead to bypass operations, which were not done at that point, and so that's why he went to him. our research, including my daughter, Jamie Benvenuti, is an amazing researcher on the net, but one of the things she found was that Dr. Carrel, Alexei Carrel, had won the Nobel Prize back in 1912 for his vascular surgery, and was predicting that someday they could do bypass surgery on humans. He'd already done it on dogs. And the way he did it was to take a carotid artery from a different subject, a segment, and put it by the heart of a patient so that the blood would circulate while the operation occurred. And so that was what I think that Lindberg went to him to see if it could happen. And his son was a blood relative of his wife's sister. The operation, as far as I can tell, never happened, but she did consult with the Rockefeller Institute for heart issues. She had a cardiologist there that became her doctor. She died in 1934 because she did have a very weak heart. So in any event, I think that's why I went to him. There's plenty of evidence in my book. I asked people to judge for themselves based on all the evidence of the way the Hauptmann trial went, which was an abomination, really. It was they proceeded so fast to trial, and they had some doctored evidence, some evidence missing that should have been there. And they had witnesses who could have been cross-examined and impeached based on statements that the defense never knew about.
Well, I got to tell you, I so appreciate your work on this subject because this is a conspiracy theory, right? People know it was investigated. That's over. Just let it go. No, this is an individual who, from listening to you, I believe he was innocent, and so we should clear his good name. And there's so many cases throughout American history. I just had an author on talking about the JFK assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald, who I don't believe is the trigger man there. And so we should clear his name. And so these are important conversations to have. And I cannot wait to get my hands on your book. This is going to be absolutely thrilling to read through. I'm going to plug the website. We've actually gone a little bit over, but I couldn't stop. It was that good of an interview. So, Chris, if you can bring up the website, lisapearlman.com. And by the way, audience, Lisa is Lise. But lisapearlman.com, you can see all the different books that she has written, and get your hands on some of these because they look phenomenal. Lisa, anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, I hope people follow what's happening now, because in the Lindberg case, it may wind up getting reopened. It needs to.
Amen to that. I will definitely echo that we definitely need to review this, and if we can, find the real culprit, but at the very least, clear a man's name. Lisa, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. If you hold on one more minute post-production to say our goodbyes, I'd appreciate it. But again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your work.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, audience, there you go. A fantastic story that we just cannot let die. History is so meaningful, and I've got my degree in it, so I love it. I'm a little bit of a nerd there. But this is a book that I want you to read. I know I'm going to, so please go check it out, lisapearlman.com. Church and State is brought to you in part by Colonial Life Spokane Independent Agents, Finders Insurance, and Mark37.com. I'm Caleb Collier. I was born for a storm.
Welcome to the fire.
Hey, this is Caleb Collier with Church and State, and I want to tell you about Patriot Pouch. Look, if you're one of these individuals that's interested in nicotine and potentially the health benefits from it, but you're concerned about some of the side effects, Patriot Pouch might be your answer. This is a company that uses nixidine instead of nicotine. It hits the same nicotine receptors in your brain, but without those side effects like elevated heart rate or elevated blood pressure. So if you want the health benefits of nicotine without nicotine, Patriot Pouch may be the company for you. I need you to go to patriotpouchusa.com. Use the promo code Church and State. You'll get a great nicotine replacement, and you'll be helping to support Church and State and everything that we do here. And remember, when you go to patriotpouchusa.com, not only are you supporting a Christian patriot business owner, but you're helping to support Church and State. This is Caleb Collier with Church and State.media. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sleeping on my pillow, do you even patriot? I got to tell you, this is the most wonderful stuff from a man who's given it all for your freedoms. Whether it be the pillow, the sheets, or the slippers, I absolutely adore MyPillow. MyPillow has the greatest products around. I know when I want to shuffle around in my bathrobe and slippers and yell at the neighbors, of course I'm buying from MyPillow. I need you to head on over to churchandstate.media, scroll over to shop, because every single time that you purchase any of these products using the promo code Church and State, you ensure that we keep our message out on the air.
I thank everybody for your support in using promo code Church and State. You guys go to mypillow.com/Church and State too, and then you get your own little platform right there, everybody.
Hey, this is Caleb Collier with the Church and State podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I want all of you to go to Galileo.com. You need to stay connected no matter what comes our way. Whether it's government intrusion or a meteor falling from the sky, Galileo has you connected. As a Marine veteran, I can tell you that communications is essential. Galileo has you connected. Whether it's worldwide coverage, uncensored content, or real-time alerts, Galileo is going to make sure that you're connected with your friends, family, and neighbors. Just head on over to churchandstate.media, scroll over to shop, and hit Galileo.com. Make sure to ask them for a free bivy stick, and make sure to use that promo code Church and State.